of Mr. Ed Walser by Patty Hemker, March 29, 1981.
Here goes.
All right, now.
Well, that's a good one. I could buy that just I can tell you about that. I'd start over as Wednesday. They went to Saginaw, Bill Roots and I. He was a druggist there, and we went to Saginaw and got the Saginaw Junior Commerce bylaws for Hansel as a president in Saginaw. He told us to take the junior bylaws for our Chamber of Commerce. And we come back and organize the Chamber of Commerce, and Bill Roots was the president, and I was a charter member, director 5 years there, and we just Harry Pete, Stanley Quinn, the attorney, and we put the showboat on, and we had a parade there, and we had the ox roast. Fellow come and put on the ox roast for us, and he roasted 14 hindquarters of beef, and we had that was on the Labor Day. We celebrated Labor Day. Ed Miller and Lyman Stewart was chairman of the Labor Day. And we had a crowd in the ox roast that day we put on, and that went through with all that stuff. I worked for George Peake. I worked for George Peake when I was 18, 19 years old. I worked a year for George Peake, or Harley Peake went to school yet. He wasn't in the market. He never worked in the market when he went to school. And I worked a year with him, a year for George Peake. And then I went in business with Ed Miller on the side street. That takes you back about 68, 70 years. And we went over on Main Street and built that building there in 1912. And we were on the market there in that building. We was in the meat business 42 years in Chesaning. And at that time, Chet Howard had the Argus. He had the Argus office. And Liebenbaum on the clothing store, and Ed Raymond worked for him at that time. And August Bauer, Cy Tubbs had the drugstore there, and August Bauer married, when he passed away, married his wife, and he run the drugstore. August Bauer did, and there was, at that time, there was about 5 MDs in Chesaning. There was Doc Stewart, and there was Doc Bailey, and Doc Felton, and Dr. Darby, and Dr. Elliott, and they were all MDs at that time. Chesaning was only about 1,500 at that time.
What about the bank failure?
Well, in the bank, the Frank Greenfeller, he was in the bank, and Coyle, Byron Coyle run the Chesaning State Bank, and he invested in a copper mine up north in the Upper Peninsula. I can't remember the name of the place, but he had copper mine, and then that copper mine went broke. I guess now it's operating, but at that time it went broke. Coyle lost all his money, invested a lot of money from the Chesaning State Bank in there, and he went in business himself. They had 3 banks at that time, and at that time there were 3 banks. Some of that stuff gets away from me though. And of course, the hotel there was owned, the old hotel there at that time was the Switzer brothers from Frankenville, Kristen, and Kristen. I can't remember the other fellow's name. Adam Smitzer and Chris Smitzer run the hotel at that time, and they had the saloon there in the hotel. That takes you back quite a ways in Chesapeake. And of course, later on, Barney Suter bought the hotel, bought the business of them there, and he ran it quite a while. That's the old stuff there. And the mill was owned by Chapman. Chapman owned the mill, and Gus Goppel worked there for him. And they used to take, farmers bought the wheat and stuff in, had it ground, and they'd get the butter, they'd get the flour, a dew bill and a flour, and have it ground in the mill. Finally the mill burnt down there. Where the corn store was, he had a shoe store in there, and that takes you way back. And then there was a barber shop. Quigley had the barber shop there. You know, Quigley, he's an old timer there, years. He had a barber shop.
Where was this? In Chesapeake?
Huh?
Where was it in Chesapeake? Was it just...
The barber shop was along that same line, right where what's the name, had the saloon right there next to Paul Dago. His name was run a fruit store there. I can't think just a minute. It's Paul. That takes you back in that same line beside the street. Paul, I'm trying to think of his last name. And Haley run that. Joe Conley and Haley run, Joe Conley had that, let's see, that saloon there right next to the drugstore. Albert Baben had let's see, right next to that. Joe Conley and Phillips. Conley and Phillips had that saloon there right next to there. That's on that same side of the street. And then there's Doc Perro had that little grocery store where Andy Solon had the barber shop. That takes you way back. Doc, he had the grocery store in there. Vern Johnson had a milliner shop, his wife did, in the corner there where Miller and I had the produce. We bought that building of fellow in Detroit, and Bentley in Detroit. We bought the building, and after they quit, she had a milliner store in there. So Vern Johnson had a grocery store on the corner there. That's where Newman is right now, where Brewer's store is. I don't know. There's a lot more stuff there, old time stuff. When I had a produce meat market there, we had We had two girls in the office, and we had a man picked up eggs east of town, another one west of town, and Charlie Leopard worked for us. We had about, I think, 5 or 6 employees at that time. Yes, we had 6 employees at that time.
How many years were you in business?
Huh?
How many years were you in business?
42 years. Mother and I was in the produce meat market. 42 years at Chesapeake. That was in meat, that's 42 years. Meat and produce business, then we just had the meat business. Of course, that takes you back. A lot of that stuff I can't get it out just right. They had a blacksmith shop there, Reed and Federley. That takes you way back. Reed and Federley had a blacksmith shop. I used to get my skates shot in there. But that takes you way back.
How far?
And golly, I was only about at the room 14, 15 years old then. I'm 90 now. That takes you back quite a while. I don't know, I can't get that stuff off good enough for you. I don't believe you better put it in the paper that way because I don't think it's good enough.
What about the building of the bridge?
How was that?
The building of the bridge in Chesapeake? The bridge, you know?
Oh, the bridge?
Yeah.
Yeah, they had the old iron bridge there, and they built Bartlett and Holmes construction company. They built a new bridge, and the old bridge, they built that new bridge there, the old bridge of the old iron bridge. Albert Cantwell's an old timer there. Albert Cantwell had a general store on the corner there, right where Joe Commons is. He had a general store, and him and his wife run it. And that's when they had the telephone was in there. Frank Stevens, he had the telephone, they had the express business in there too with it. He had a grocery store and a dry goods store. And his wife was in the dry goods store, Albert Cantwell's wife was. And Albert run the grocery store. And Cantwell was the one that bought Coriel's house. Of course, that takes you way back. That's all tore down. It was tore down, you know, there. That's years ago. Cantwell run that dry goods.
Can you remember the first car or car dealers?
Yeah, Albert Cantwell had the first car come to Chesapeake. You know, I remember I stood in the meat market right in Washington when they was teaching them to drive. They were driving down there about 5 miles an hour. Down Main Street, he was learning them to drive. Albert Cantwell had the first automobile in Chesapeake, as I know. Yeah, he had the first car, and then there was the Model S Buick, the old Model S Buick. There was Fred Miller and several fellows had that. Fred Miller and I can't remember the names. There were 4 of those on that old Model S Buick. There was 4 of those.
When did you get your first car?
The first car I got was a Ford. I don't remember just what year I bought it in. I don't remember what year I bought it in, but I had half a dozen cars or more. It was a Ford I bought. First car I bought was a Ford. And at that time there wasn't many cars in town. Doc Stewart was another one that bought a car after. Cantwell had the first car, and then Doc Stewart bought the car. He was an expert. Mason had a car. Mason bought a car. There's quite a few come in there then with cars. course, the old Chesaning Hardware Company, Louis Perro on Mansion for years there, the 4 days, you see. That's an old time place.
What about the Nason Mansion?
How's that?
What about the Nason Mansion?
Nason? Well, that, I was 18 years old when that was built, the big house, I mean, where what's the name is now, Howard, got his restaurant. That Nason, at that time, when I was a kid going to school, there was Bob Nason and Henry Nason. They went to school the same time I did, and they lived down Saginaw, on Saginaw Street there. And then Nason come over, and George Nason built that house, and I can't remember just what year he built it in, that big house. But I was in it lots. The boys were great friends, and I played billiards up there on the 3rd floor a lot of times in that place with the boys, Rob and Henry. I went to school together with them when I went to school.
What was school like when you went?
The Chesaning High School, there was only one school there at that time. That's the old school there, where they got now for the old agers. I guess they got it now, don't they? That old school. I think they have I don't know whether, but that was the only school there was in Chesaning at that time. Yeah. We bought cream there. We bought cream in the produce, cream and bought chickens and ducks and stuff. Then days the farmers dressed ducks and geese and stuff, and we bought oceans of that stuff there in the produce. Well, I run the produce, and Miller was in the market at that time, you know. They come in, and they was on Saginaw Street there at, no, it wasn't Saginaw Street, it was on, yeah, it was Saginaw Street. They had right where the Oddfellows Hall, they took where the Oddfellows had, that's where they started the milk station. And then they built McDonald Dairy built that big plant out there afterward. But that's where they started in, was there. Now, the church, the Catholic Church, I was the altar boy for Father Studer at that time, and he had 4 parishes. He had Albion, he had Oakley, and he had St. Charles and Chesaning. And I was Fred Basinski and Gus, his brother, and myself. We were altar boys. We went around with him when he had Mass. We'd have one Mass in Chesaning at 8 o'clock and the other one at 10 o'clock, maybe in Albany. And when we had it at 10 o'clock, 8 o'clock in Albany, we'd have it Chesaning at 10 o'clock. And at 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock I think it was. And I was altar boy for him at that time. And then I ushered until I got too old for altar boy. I ushered, and then after I got too old for that, I took the sisters to Oakley and instructed. Father Remsing had the Oakley parish up there for instruction for First Communion. That's stuff way back. That takes you quite a ways back. It's hard for me to get that stuff out just right. I don't think it. Old Bob Mason, he was in the lumber business. He was in the lumber business in Louisiana. That's where Bob made his money. He was a fellow that all the city was a millionaire. He built that big house up there, and he had the 2 children. He had Mrs. Jackson, that married Johnny Jackson, that daughter, and of course George Mason. That's the children that he had, and Jackson run a grocery store there, and Bob Nason, I remember him well. He used to sit around the store there. he made $1 million and couldn't write his own name. He had to use a cross for his name. Southern Pine, where he shipped up north in Louisiana. Then he took a guy down there and built sidewalks in Louisiana, and he made a lot of money off of that. He's the one who built that great big house up on the hill there.
Tell us, okay.
Albert Campbell had the Opera House, and we had a skating rink in there when I was a boy. In the Opera House, I skated. We used to have dances in the old Opera House there, and that he was the same fellow who had the park up there at that time. He had a couple of deer in there and a couple of bear in that park. And he run the park there, where they got Showboat Park now. Albert Campbell had that at that time. He was going to kept adding to it, but that kind of what backed up on it afterward. And he owned the Opera House. He had a bandwagon in there doing music, and we had a roller skate there, and we used to go in there and that's where we had our dances. I danced in the old Opera House a lot.
Where was that at?
That was right across from right where, when it burned down, that's where Ryder and Schwartz had the garage. Right there. So they had the garage across from the bigger buildings.
How about the first fire department that was in Chesaning?
I can't tell too much about that, but my brother was a fireman at that time. Frank Walser had a clothing store there when Greenbaum, brother Frank had a clothing store, and next to him there, Charlie Weisenberg had the hardware there, right where the sales company is now. He had the hardware there.
Well, what about the railroad stations and the depots?
Well, they had, I remember who was up there, but I can't think of his name, who operated the telegraph office in there. I was in there a lot when I was a kid. The trains used to come in there. We used to go up to see the trains come in.
Was there ever a theater in Chesaning?
How was that?
What was the first theater like in Chesaning?
First
theater?
Well, the first theater, Ed Miller and Roy Smith had the first it didn't do any talking. It was silent. That was right where Gertz got his barbershop, restaurant now. They had a picture show in there. That's what we used to call it, a picture show. Roy Smith and Ed Miller had that. And then, I can't think of his name. I can't think of what his name was. It bought the business. And from that on,
Was it Mr. Medill that run the theater?
Yeah, that's his name. How do you remember? Yeah, Medill. Yeah, he bought the picture business and run it there. Yeah. Ended up where it is now. They sold and then they went down, built that building down there.
What about the telephone company? The first telephones?
The home telephone company was owned by the home telephone company. Well, Campbell had he had the telephone. In there, Frank Stevens operated that. For the telephone, he had in that general store of Campbell's, where Frank Stevens, he took care of that. That was a telephone office, right there, a telephone. But that was a big company afterwards. I can't think who owned the company. It was owned. I don't know, I can't get some of that stuff. There was up by the bakery there, where they had the telephone company, where what's the name of the girls that, I can't think of their names, worked in there, but that's where they had the telephone office afterward up there. I don't know.
Who had the first car dealer in Chestnut?
The first garage, you mean? Or sold cars? Well, that was a Chestnut hardware company. Louis Peril was the one that owned that. It was a Chestnut hardware company. They had the Ford agency at that time. Louis Peril was the one who had that there. And of course they had, in that same building there, he had the farmer's equipment too, the bags and stuff like that. He sold farm equipment they had in there.
Whereabouts was this?
That was right there by where Manning's is now. Yeah. Yeah, that's where Manning's is now.
What about, did you ever fight in a war, like World War I?
I didn't have to go to war because we handled a food product. They didn't take them at that time. I didn't have to, I was in class 4. I didn't take in class 4 because they didn't take anybody to handle the food product. We handled the food product, the meat and produce at that time. And I didn't have to, meat market, I didn't have to go to war on that account. Yeah, I kept me out of the war. Anybody having a food product, they didn't have to go. Yeah, I wasn't drafted. I never went for an examination in World War I.
Were there any scarcities of food,
How was that?
Was there shortages of food when the war was...
Shortage of food?
Yeah.
Well, not at that time. But remember, there wasn't no shortage of food.
Do you remember any big storms that hit Chestnut that, way back when? Or fires?
I can't remember anything outstanding.